Welcome everyone to episode 47 of Future Strong. I can't quite believe we're in December, but welcome to the final month of 2022. My name's Nikki Garchea and I'm the co-founder of an organization called Capfinity. And at Capfinity, we focus on hiring and talent mobility powered by strengths, with a particular focus in everything to do with Gen Z. And as always, that is what we focus on Future Strong. I'm delighted to be with my wonderful co-host, Lindsay, and also we will shortly welcome the very brilliant Dr. Wendy Smith. So, Lindsay, how are you keeping?
Hi, Nikki. Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Pollock. I'm a career and workplace author and speaker and a proud brand ambassador for Capfinity. As always, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you are watching from. We're always happy to have all of you with us today. I'm excited, Nikki, that you are coming to New York City next week. Looking forward to that. And I feel like we're probably going to be drinking some coffee on that trip. So I just wanted to
You're so cool to me. You're so cool to me.
Coffee mugs here in New York, and you be great to.
I need to bring my cup with me.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of day here, you know.
Yeah, it's not going to cut it.
Afternoon espresso.
We do things big in New York, but we'll be happy.
I'm ready.
This is also a very special episode because Dr. Wendy K. Smith and I went to college together many moons ago and reconnected at our college reunion last summer. So all of you in higher ed, the work that you do on campus lasts forever. And now here we are. We were on an author panel at our reunion and sat next to each other. And Wendy is here to talk about her insane new book, which Tom Peters calls Pure and Simple, a masterpiece. So without further ado, Wendy Smith, would you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? And can you show us what kind of coffee you're drinking today as well?
Lindsay, Nikki, it is so good to be here with you. It's so good to be here with all of you who are joining us live and those that will hear the recording. I am truly, this is my coffee cup of the day. It's my travel cup. As Lindsay and Nikki know, I hit traffic this morning and was deeply trying to hold, as we will talk about, the both anxiety to make sure I was here on time and calm to make sure I was grounded. So I am in that space and raring to go with that emotional experience to have this conversation with both of you.
Oh, well, we're so glad that you made it, Wendy. And we would have had to have bantered for a little bit longer until you'd arrived. So all the guests are just so pleased that you were here on time because they're like, enough, you two. I've been obviously researching you before you coming on as a guest, and I've read a lot of psychologists raving about your book because it feels like to them that you've explained some things that actually were not working always in sequence. So it's fantastic to have you come on and explain a little bit about your research and also the book itself. But will you just share with everyone listening a little bit about your career, what brings you to writing this book and being, I'm going to say, as accomplished as you are?
Oh, well, thank you both. And indeed, Lindsay, it's great to be back in conversation with you. I don't know if you want to mention this. It was our 25th reunion.
Wendy.
Sorry. And so it is so
wedding that would make it.
In some ways, I like to start, for me, this journey in college. And I am indeed an organizational psychologist. I study organizational theory, organizational behavior, and have been studying for the last 20 years or so this idea of how we make decisions, how we get stuck in either or thinking, and what it means to move beyond that to be more generative, creative, enabling. And I do start this story in my own experience in college, trying to figure out my own career, my own next steps. We say right at the beginning of the book, or psychologists often say this, that research is me search, because I was so stuck in my own either or in college. As many of you working with college students or thinking about career development, I really was stuck in, I want to be really clear where I want to go next. I want certainty. and I want impact. And while what was exciting to me at the time was being a campus leader, being involved in organizations on campus, leadership as a career is very amorphous. And thinking about what that meant was very uncertain. But what was really clear to me was medicine, because I had friends, family members and friends' parents who were doctors, because it felt very directly impactful and because it felt very directly certain. And Lindsay, I think I was telling you, there was one summer in advance of, or one spring in advance of my junior year summer where I was thinking about what am I going to do for the summer that will open up the next steps for my career. But I didn't know what I wanted in my career. And I was sitting in the Career Center when research happened in person with books at the Career Center, trying to figure out if I should spend the summer, for example, in DC doing some lobbying work, or if I should spend the summer in a research lab. And I was so frustrated. I hopped on my bike. It was cold. I remember I biked up to what in the middle of New Haven was East Rock. And I sat there thinking that I don't know which direction should go. And maybe if I sit there for long enough, I would either get some kind of divine inspiration or, internal intuition. And none came. And this book and the research that I've been doing since is really a response to that, which is why we get so stuck at these crossroads and how we could think about them in better ways.
I love that. That resonates with me so much, that divine intervention just didn't come, and you have to start taking action to figure it out. And I think at a lot of elite schools, there's a clear path to medical school. There's a clear path to law school. There's a clear path to maybe Wall Street. And if that's not your choice, as all the career services people know, that can be really powerful. You were, of course, one step ahead of me because I never went to the Career Center. So you actually took that step. Speaking of career centers, we have a lot of leaders from that field here today. We have so many good friends. Welcome Mike Summers from Lafayette College. We have our good friend Fred Burke from Provincetown, Mass. And Baruch College in New York. Brian Quick from Abbott, Afsana. Thank you for joining us, and please, everybody, continue to introduce yourselves. I want to hear about both and thinking, and obviously you are a graduate of Harvard Business School, you're a professor at the University of Delaware, you run a Center for Women Leadership. I want to dive in, though, to this topic, and please bring us in any direction that it takes, particularly for this audience of recruiters and career services professionals thinking about our own careers and thinking about the young people that we want to mentor. What is both and thinking, and what are some examples of it?
So both and thinking is a response to the challenges that we face in our lives and an alternative way to think about those challenges. So it starts with these moments of tension, this sort of fork in the road. We like to quote Robert Frost, the two roads diverged. And the reason we like to quote Robert Frost is because two roads diverged and I took the one less traveled by. The beauty of that is to encourage us to do something novel and risky. The problem with it is that it assumes that there are two roads and that we are constrained to choose between road A and road B. And that is so much of the way that we grow up, so much of the way that we are trained, which is given option A and B, which one do you choose? Both and says, what's option C? What's the alternative? And if I take a choice down option A, there's going to be other forks in the road along the way that make these choices along the way. So if either or is looking at a problem and trying to choose between them, both and says, are there ways to accommodate the competing demands to enable a more holistic, a more creative alternative? And what does that look like? And how do we help ourselves and then the people that we work with to think that way more effectively?
So I find it fascinating that you can actually help individuals see that there is that road C to take, because I do think we grow up thinking it is literally one way or the other. At these times, certainly organizations and the business leaders that we work with at Capfinity, I think are almost every day navigating situations that feel complex. They're having to learn in new ways. There isn't a clear path. There's not many books written about the best way forward, particularly at these really changing times. Why do you think this approach is so critical for individuals right now? Super leading question, I guess. Is it critical? It feels like it's really of the moment, but But what do you think is happening now, and why can this help?
Nikki, there's so much to say on that. I do think I was just having this conversation last night with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, who is leading an organization of over 300 people and feeling that tug of war between competing demands as a leader. So I think that what you're tapping into is that this approach is one in which we can think about the kinds of tensions, dilemmas, competing demands, tug of wars in our personal lives, in our interactions with other people, in our organizational lives as leaders, and in the world broadly. And the invitation at all of those levels is to pause before we make a choice and consider and engage these opposing ideas. Consider if we are, somebody else's perspective other than ours before we go into the decision making. Why is it so critical at this moment? I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that, so in the book, we say there's three big things that surface. We talk about the need for both and is underlying these paradoxes, these competing demands that are not only oppositional, they're also integrative. And we talk about three different conditions that we've researched that surface these paradoxes more. One is when there's more change, because the future becomes the present so much more quickly that you're in that tension between today and tomorrow, the past, the present, the long term and the short term. Two is when there is more of an experience of scarcity of resources, when we feel like we have to make choices between who gets resources more acutely. And three is when there is what we call a plurality or diversity or variety of perspectives, which we know is great to enable creativity and challenging to be able to navigate. And when we have so many different perspectives, it's hard. People have to learn the skills of accommodating those different perspectives. And I think we are in a world right now where there's a lot of change. There's a lot of scarcity, and there is certainly a lot of plurality of different perspectives of stakeholders pulling us in different directions that makes it hard, or it's valuable then to bring that all together, and hard to do so.
Couple of new viewers. We want to welcome Bruce from Brookline and James from Ireland. Welcome. Wendy, I'm really curious for some specific examples of where you see both and thinking helping people to make tough decisions or to see through from not picking A and B and finding C. Can you give us some examples from your research?
Yes, and I want to say hello to Bruce as well. Bruce, it's nice to reconnect here online. Thanks for being here. Yes. One of the things that is really powerful about both and is that we start with tensions. And again, those tensions can happen anywhere and everywhere. And then we say, what are the ways to navigate those? And the way that in this book, Both and Thinking, that we structure that is to identify a set of 4 sets of tools that work together to navigate both and then apply them to our lives. So we have 3 chapters. The first says, how do we apply this to our individual decision making? So when we feel tensions in our career, as we started off with, how do we move beyond that stuckness between one or the other and into an integrative or deeper, holistic, more creative approach? And that could be tensions of what do we do with our career, our work-life tensions. It could be tensions that we experience between how do we manage to advance the way things are today and change them for tomorrow. One that we hear a lot of is, as an employee in an organization, do we stay heads down, keeping things moving, advancing in performance, or heads up, trying new things, innovating, changing along the way as a tension? That is, so at the individual level, all of these come up. As a leader, am I more democratic and bring more voices in, or autocratic and clear in terms of position and the place going forward? Well, both. As an individual, how do I navigate diversity? Am I super inclusive, or are there boundaries that I need to create? Well, how do we create boundaries to be inclusive and be inclusive to navigate boundaries? Well, both, right? So all of these come up at the individual level. At the second component is, how does this come up in our relationships, in group relationships? And here's where we see the experience of where we have a point of view and another individual or group has a point of view. How do we accommodate these different points of view to come together for something more creative? In the book, we give this example of a police chief in South Carolina in the United States that brings together police and citizens to enable a safer environment where there was a lot of conflict between police and citizens in the environment. But this comes up in our organizations between those that are more research and innovation oriented and those that are more finance and operations oriented. It comes up in our personal lives. I love telling stories of my poor husband about how we navigate the both and between our different, not always so different, but sometimes different perspectives on parenting and navigating that. And then it comes up in our leadership in organizations. How do we create conditions so that organizations can be both current looking and future looking, can be both focused on the bottom line financial demands and think about a broader social mission, can be both global and local. So we can pick any of those and do a deeper dive.
I'd love to do a deeper dive, particularly on the students and the early career individual, because even when you told your own story, Wendy, and you shared kind of your own sort of experience, when I think of students going to career services or early career professionals joining the workplace, this both and thinking concept is hitting them so fast. And I wonder for either career services or anyone in learning and development who supports those individuals, it feels as though there's really good self-coaching and questions that you can help people navigate what they're going through. But I think you experience those tensions really acutely at that particular point. It would be great to get your perspective on kind of how can we have conversations with Gen Z at this time?
Yeah, and sometimes I think back to my own career, or the example that we use in the book is a woman that we had interviewed who was thinking about making a career choice. And those really do feel like moments of crossroads because we have to make a decision. Am I going to spend my summer working in a lab and therefore going down the road of medicine, or am I going to spend my summer working in DC and going down the road of something, else? In the book, does this woman who we were talking to, she had this incredible job, wonderful team, fabulous project she was working on, and was at that moment, because it's always when things are going well that we're offered the new possibility, a new job. Do you stay or do you go? And in those moments, that's where it feels like we feel demanded to make a choice. You can't both stay and go. I can't both decide to go to med school and decide to be an academic, or and decide to be whatever an amorphous leader I was thinking about. And so it feels like we have to make a choice. And the invitation is to actually switch our thinking on that. And that starts with changing the question. So if we're asking these trade-off, dichotomous questions, do we do A or B? The first step is in shifting our mindset, our approach is to say, can we change the question to a both and? How can I both be a leader and somebody who's doing medicine? How can I both stay and go? Well, that seems like an impossible question. But I will say the first experience we have is that as soon as we change the question to ask the how can I do both, it opens up all kinds of creative possibilities for us to rethink what's possible. So I wanted to say one more piece, because the next step after we change the question is we call it separating and connecting. And what we mean by that, and if anybody studied negotiations, this might sound familiar. What we mean by that is doing a deep dive into what's at stake for each of these different options. What's at stake for me to be an academic? Or be a leader? What do I love about it? What's exciting about it? What do I care about of why I'm interested in medicine? What do I love about it? What's interesting about it? And once I do that deeper dive into these two options, I can then ask the question, what are ways to accommodate both of these possibilities over the course of my career, so that the decision, whether I'm going to be an academic or whether I'm going to be a leader or whether I'm going to be a doctor, becomes less relevant than how do I accommodate these different components of what I'm interested in into the life that I'm leading? And that opens up, again, all kinds of creative new possibilities in this more holistic mindset.
Nikki, I feel like we have to bring strengths into this conversation, because I feel like having gone through the Capfinity strengths profile, it sort of naturally expands your thinking. So what is this bringing up for you, Nikki? And I'm sure all of us have dilemmas in mind where we've been stuck in A or B and now we're thinking about it differently because of this conversation. Nikki, what would you add from a strengths perspective on this? Because
yeah, that's a brilliant question, Lindsay. And one of the things that an accompanying strengths question to what Wendy shared is thinking about maybe an unrealized strength you could use to help elicit your thinking for alternative perspectives. So we don't know this, maybe there's a research project in this, Wendy, but it's very likely that maybe the question you ask yourself that you feel most comfortable with is using your top strength, and exploring those questions that maybe are alternative, that might bring out the broader and more creative thinking, might be the strengths you use less, the unrealized strengths in our language. So I think that there is probably a way of encouraging individuals to not just ask themselves the usual question, but not just always use the behaviors and skills that they're most comfortable with, and to try on the things that they're less used to, but are still there wanting to be used, because I think that probably would elicit an additional option. Wendy, I've got one question for you, and it's completely off track, so apologies, because it's something that has been playing on my mind in the last 24 hours, speaking to lots of leaders in this space. And obviously we've seen the press in the UK and the US in relation to layoffs. And many CEOs, not all, have come out and said, we got it wrong. We thought things were going in one direction. We overhired. And this is across multiple industries, and it's having obviously kind of interesting and quite profound impacts at the moment. What I'm fascinated by is how many people have said, we overhired, we thought it was going in one direction. If they were to ask themselves some of the questions that you would have asked with the research in the book, is there anything that, and I know you can't undo the past, but I feel like there was other questions they could have asked around the boardroom. Have you got any perspectives on it?
I love that. I wanted to just say two things that you've said that actually point to some of the dangers of either or and what the possibilities are. And so the question is, why is either or thinking problematic? And because we say it's limited at best, detrimental at worst. And it's detrimental in part. And I want to just raise up what you said about strengths, in part because when we make a choice, psychology will say that we want to stick with that choice. And so if we have a strength, one of the things we know is that sometimes we overuse that strength until that strength becomes a weakness. And what I love about the work that you do and what you were describing is the need to actually recognize our panoply, our diversity, our portfolio of strengths, so that we can rely on various strengths at the moments that we need. It's a much more agile, dynamic approach, then we get stuck with our one strength, and then we can't move from there. And we see this all the time with professionals that are stuck in their whole system. And we talk about that as falling down a rabbit hole. And actually, and Nikki, what the other example that you're pointing to, what happens once we fall down a rabbit hole and then the world crashes around us or something changes, is that we talk about it as overcorrecting. Or the image that we use is the wrecking ball, because we move from one set, one approach, one decision, one path in Robert Frost's path, one strength, and swing all the way to the other, killing the good with the bad, right? It wrecks the good with the bad. And that's, I think, what the CEOs are doing, which is these massive swings in hiring, from overhiring and underhiring and overhiring and underhiring. And so that wrecking ball is the other detrimental approach to when you're overemphasizing one question, which is, do we have enough people in the short term? And not thinking, let me think about the long term as well. Let me think about what it means to sort of use alternative sources of labor in the short term to get to the long term. There's a whole variety of things, but they overcorrected. And so then you see these massive swings. I'll just tell you the third pattern that we see, and this might resonate deeply, and this is also in the news, of problematic either-oring, is how when we take a position, we reinforce that position, And then we get into these polarized conversations with other people that take a different position because we defend ourselves against that. We talk about that as trench warfare, because in this polarized world, we're constantly digging deeper and deeper into our own trenches, reinforcing our echo chambers, sticking with people that are similar to us, and shooting out at the other perspective without really listening to it, with sort of dehumanizing the other perspective. So all three of these are the reasons why we've got this problematic approach. In the alternative is recognizing how we are in this dichotomous either or space, that we are in short-term thinking, linear thinking, and asking, as I said, starting with asking the both and question. How do I both hire for the short term and the long term? How do I think about my career in these different ways? How do I both honor my perspective on a point of view on something and be able to listen to somebody else? I might not agree with them, but listen and honor a different perspective.
It's so incredibly relevant. I wanted to bring in one last topic, Wendy. You are the director of the Women's Leadership Initiative at the Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware. Is there a gender component to all this? What have been your experiences? You work in a business school, but with young women of Gen Z, and do you see, kind of intersectionality having a play in both STEM thinking? Because I think you brought up diversity. I'd just be curious on your role in a women's organization or a women's initiative.
There's so much to say on this. What I'll say in the short is that there's research that will point out that women tend to be more collaborative. We have, and if anybody's interested, it's available. We can put the link in. We have a paradox mindset inventory where people can, in fact, assess where you fit in being able to be comfortable with both and thinking. In that mindset inventory, we have yet to find gender differences. We assume there are, we expect that there to be, and we have yet to find that. So there's more research to be done there. I think the answer is, I don't know. And there's an open research question about that. And I'd be curious what people listening think. And I do know that some of the competencies to enable both anding, the reaching out, the relational piece, there is research that says that tends to be more gender enabled or more female enabled, and I think that it's a skill. The other component to this is that this is a skill, this is a competency that we have seen and know we can all learn. And we are in the project and in the hope of inviting as many people to learn this competency, because we truly believe that this is not just something that helps us with our careers, but helps us to get to a better world together, to solve our greatest problems more effectively together.
Well, that seems a very pertinent place to start to summarize the episode in creating a better world together. Because I'm in the UK, and I just want to let anyone know who might be in Oxford next Friday, and I'll ask Bailey to pop the event up, but you can hear Wendy and I think your co-author speak at Syad Business School in Oxford, and there are still spaces on Eventbrite. So we're just going to put up the opening for that. And anyone listening back, I would urge you to get to see Dr. Wendy Smith in person. Sometimes these episodes, Wendy, are like experiencing, I'm sure it's the same for you, Lindsay, like live coaching. And so many things you shared here make me think about my experience as a co-founder over the last 17 years. I've often thought about the flip-flopping between decision-making as you want to make a correction. So it's been amazing to have you and to share so much of your great wisdom and your research. Lindsay, now for your chance to summarize for your rekindled friend and professional colleague, but what would your summary be of this episode?
It is such a pleasure to reconnect with Wendy Smith, my college friend, my former college friend, my past college, my college friend, Wendy Smith. Thank you for joining us on Future Strong. Thank you to all of you who tuned in and for your enthusiasm for the topic. My top Capfinity strength is narrator. So it is my job at the end of every episode to recap 3 thoughts that are really going to stick with us. Number 1 is a reminder that we often get so constrained by choosing path A or chip up path B from the old Robert Frost poem. And your book, Both and Thinking, suggests that there might be an option C. So whenever you find yourself thinking A or B, ask, could there be an option C? Second, when you expand your thinking, you open up creative possibilities. It recognizes a broader portfolio of strengths and helps us avoid getting really trenchant in maybe overusing a particular strength or getting caught in one area of belief. And this makes us all more agile and dynamic as individuals. And the third topic is that this can really actually kind of change the world, because as we get more diverse, as we are in a world that is moving quickly, people can get very entrenched in certain areas of thought. We talk about that in the United States a lot as red and blue. And if we start to ask, where is the and in those situations, we might be able to solve a lot of problems. And I just noticed from a semantic point of view, you are so good at using the word and frequently in your conversation. And I think the more we use and in our daily discussions, the more we can start to apply both and thinking. So I cannot recommend both and thinking by Wendy K. Smith and Marianne Lewis to all of you. And Nikki, I will leave it to you to wrap up.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Nicely done as ever. So thank you again, Dr. Wendy Smith, for your time. We hope everyone will read your book and also enjoy listening back to this episode. And just to say to all Future Strong listeners that the next episode will be the last one of 2022. It will be episode 48, and we will be joined by Lisa Maris, Head of Research at Group GTI. And we've invited Lisa on to talk about a topic which has been pretty critical through certainly the last 2 years, but for many students in 2022, which is going to talk about student mental health and things that we can be thinking about to make people stronger as we go into 2023. So of course, Lindsay and I will have some banter and holiday wrap up before we then welcome you all back for the 2023 episodes. But thank you again, Dr. Wendy Smith and Lindsay, and we wish you all great weekends.
Thank you both. What a pleasure.